A huge welcome on Wealthy Wednesdays. I have been looking forward to our conversation because we are going to talk about owning your story. Are you catching some disturbance?
Yes, I was going to ask you. I'm not sure.
Let's see if that helps. Does that help?
That's better.
Okay, all right. So, we are going to talk about owning your story, which is the first step to recovery, and that's what your specialty is. So, I'm very, very excited about our conversation. A huge welcome to you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Parul. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start by talking a little bit about your story. Susan, what is your story?
Well, I'm a survivor of 4 abusive relationships. I am a survivor of childhood trauma and abandonment. And my 4th abusive relationship, the man almost killed me, Parul. It was a huge, well, I wouldn't be here today. Let's put it that way. But out of that story came my recognition after a couple of years of feeling sorry for myself and drinking too much and all of that kind of stuff, came the recognition that me, Susan Ball, was the common denominator in all of these relationships. And I hated that. I hated it. I went, no, we're not talking about that. No, I had nothing to do with this. Now, that's not to say that I asked to be abused, absolutely not. But the twisted, tangled childhood versions of healthy love that I took into my adult relationships didn't work there.
No.
So I kept the abuse from my childhood, my survival trauma, my survival techniques, I took them into my adult relationships, but they were a disaster because I was not healed from my childhood trauma. So it was a repeat performance several times.
Yeah, yeah. At times we have to go through the same experience over and over again
Yes,
until it finally sticks and lands.
absolutely. And there sometimes you get pushback around that because people say, oh, you're victim blaming. No, not at all. Real recovery after abuse or after trauma or after those things really does need us to kind of dig deep into that dirt and you reconcile some of the stuff that happened to us, Pearl. You know that because you work on storytelling as well.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that you asked for it. It
Yep.
just means that somewhere along the line your story got a little bit glitchy and you have gaps in it and you don't have a healthy perspective on relationships or what is good and what is bad. And that was me. Plus, I had such abandonment issues that if anybody said to me, I love you, you're the greatest, within 5 minutes, I was hooked. I was there forever
Yep.
because I wanted to fill that gap. But the gap was for me to fill.
Oh, so talk to us a little bit about that because looking for love outside of ourselves or looking for that validation outside of ourselves, there are so many of us who do that and it never ever works. So talk to us a little bit about that.
There is when you are looking for validation outside of yourself, it's really unhealthy, and it's also a survival response to trauma somewhere along the line. And when I say trauma, I want to clarify because I've done a lot of research and a lot of learning about this. When I say childhood trauma, everybody says to me, oh no, I wasn't beaten. Oh no, there was no sexual abuse. Oh no, my parents weren't violent or any of that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be any of those. It can be the simplest thing that as a child, we don't have the cognitive ability to reconcile and it becomes an unhealthy story. So I'll give you an example. Daddy works long hours. He's never home. You're a child, you think, is it my fault? He doesn't like me. Maybe he doesn't come home because I'm too much or I'm too loud or I'm too this. So when he does come home, you become the people-pleasing child, the child looking for his attention. That unhealthy response goes into your adult relationships. So it doesn't have to be the big things that affect you. As a child, we interpret things to the best of our ability at the time. If that makes
Yeah.
sense, we only have so much brain power at the time, so we do what we can with it. So it's that recognition that something happened in your childhood. And I'll give you a story of one of my clients. This was a beautiful story because she kept arguing with me. I had a perfect childhood. Nothing happened. There was nothing. My blah, blah, blah. Well, it turned out, because I kept pushing and saying, no, this came from somewhere. When her baby brother was born, he had severe disabilities. So all of the attention of her mom and dad obviously went to her brother. Not that they did anything wrong, absolutely. But she, as a child, reconciled that sense of abandonment, that emotional abandonment, as looking outside herself to be validated for love. Her parents
Yeah.
didn't do it on purpose. There was no malice involved in that at all. But as a child, how she interpreted it affected. And when she had that aha moment, she looked at me and she said, I almost hate you right now. Almost. But
Almost.
it was her real recovery moment. It was that moment when she recognized that that gap that had been created by that situation completely out of her control, she
Yeah.
was looking outside herself to fill that gap, to fill that loneliness, to feel that sense of abandonment that as a child she had created.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of times we can get stuck in our own stories, can't we? If we go back to this person, maybe she, I don't know, because I don't know, I don't have more insight into the story, but because the brother had special needs, everybody would feel guilty about, or she would feel guilty about feeling otherwise, thinking that I didn't receive the attention that I deserved and wanted as a child because there was someone else in the family who had bigger needs. And we can spin that story just because it comforts us, but we don't begin to heal until we come face to face with it, just how you helped her get there.
Well, and yes, and that's exactly true because her gap, her childhood gap that she brought forward was she never spoke up or asked for anything
Yeah,
because she felt guilt and shame to do that because that was the story she had learned.
yeah.
That if she did that, then she was taking away valuable time and care from her baby brother. And
Mm-hmm.
that got translated into never asking for what she wanted in life,
Yeah, yeah.
including
Or
of
maybe
herself.
just giving, giving, giving.
Yes, yes. And we know what happens there.
We definitely do.
Yeah.
So tell us, Susan, what was a turning point for you after being in these abusive relationships and having that running that pattern over and over again? What was that moment like when you realized that the common denominator was you?
You know, Pearl, for a long time I fought it. I fought it because I told myself, as many of my clients have told themselves, I've dealt with my childhood trauma. It was no big deal. I get it. You know, my parents did the best they could. I had all these running stories in my head that has nothing to do with who I am now.
Yeah,
But when I sat down and I really thought about um, the loneliness I felt as a child, being abandoned and being passed off to different relatives because technically my parents didn't want me, there was a loneliness in that I needed to find somebody to fill that up. It was that recognition and actually sitting back. And here's the interesting part. When I first started this journey, and when anybody first starts this journey, I thought to myself, yes, my parents didn't want me. They made that abundantly clear. But I grew up and I learned that that was okay. And but I had not accepted the emotional trauma that had caused for me. Does that make sense?
mm-hmm.
I had
Mm-hmm.
accepted that this had happened.
Yeah,
You know, they were what they were and this had happened. But the emotional trauma that it created, the loneliness, the people pleasing, the codependency, the constantly looking for love, looking for validation, looking for acceptance, And the big one for me was a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel I belonged to anything, to a family, to a group, to anything. So when I sat down and I started to journal, which I also resisted, didn't want to do that because it brings up all of these things. What I did was I started to write out my stories from my childhood parole. And then I would write at the bottom, you know, how does it make me feel to read this?
Mm.
Did I feel angry? Did I feel sorrow? Did I feel lonely? Did I feel abandoned? How did I feel? And that's how I started to recognize the emotions. I had buried them. I had buried them in this place of life must go on. Parents do the best they can, blah, 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 which they do. I get that. I had never spoken of it. I had never said anything to anybody. People would, from the kindergarten to grade 6, I went to 24 public schools.
Wow.
And when I would say that to people, they would give me a weird look. But to me, it was like just a fact. But all the trauma that created for me that I had never even come close to looking at was buried. And I needed to do basically an archaeological dig on my childhood to figure that one out.
Yeah, yeah. The distinction you make between accepting that an event has happened in our life or to us and really processing the loss and the change that it has caused for us, I think being able to make that distinction and work through it is really powerful.
It is, and it comes back to recovery after abuse as well, because part of that recovery is accepting this happened to you. This guy was a jerk. This guy was an abuser. This guy hurt you. Accept it. Now we have to move on to what was the emotional chaos that created. Where are all the emotions? Where's the psychological trauma? Where is the filament and the connection to your childhood? Where is all of that story? How does it come together? Because they are connected.
Yeah. I understand this distinction in context of my own experience of losing health, which was through cancer. So in my case, I never denied the fact that I had a long-term condition or a life-threatening condition, which is where the acceptance came in, which was great because with acceptance, we can start working with things instead of fighting them. But it still needed all that healing process and all the help that I sought out from people, amazing people in this world, my counselors and my therapists and my coaches. And so acceptance was great, but I still had to do all the work and come out the other side because that emotional journey and that healing needs to be done. And I think that applies to any crucial experience, any hard experience, not just loss of health or loss of relationship or domestic abuse.
I'm so happy you said that because a lot of people will say, once you get to acceptance, you're healed. That's not
Oh
true.
no, that's
No.
just the beginning.
Yeah, thank you. But you have to get to that acceptance to say, yes, this happened to me. Yes,
Yes.
I had cancer. Yes, I survived cancer. But now you got to heal all the other stuff that came with that. So acceptance is not the big balloon that sets you free from your trauma, not at all. It's only the beginning.
It's just the beginning, and it's the beginning of something very messy and very murky because the next few steps we would have no idea what we are doing. Well, at least that's how it was for me. I had no idea what I was doing and where I was going, and I'm sure it was pretty similar for you as well.
I had no idea. In the beginning, I thought, oh, I have to hate my parents. I have to take this out on them. I have to be angry with them. But ultimately, what I discovered was that when I sat and I wrote out my stories and I looked at my parents from sort of a third party perspective,
Yeah.
I saw them as damaged goods as well. I saw them from a different perspective. For example, my mother had 5 children in an era when women didn't have any birth control. They had no choice. She did not want me. I was the fifth one. She wanted her freedom.
Yeah.
And I could see it from her perspective. She had done this all her flippin' life, raising babies. Does that make what she did right? No. But it certainly gave me a sense of forgiveness for her, to see from her as a woman in this era where we have all the rights and we can make choices and we can do all of those things. She never had that. She never had that. She never had the right to say no to my dad if that was the night in the bedroom. She did not have that right. So I saw her from a different perspective as a woman. I truly did. So when you start this journey, you might think, oh, you're going to be angry, or something's going to happen, or you're going to disconnect from your family. That's not necessarily true. You may, in fact, even end up loving them more because you'll see their flaws. And that my mother didn't do this to be cruel. She did it because she was wanting a sense of freedom that she had never experienced in her whole entire life. When you think about a woman who starts out having babies at 17 and all of that kind of stuff, I can see that she was like, I don't want to cook and clean and do all that stuff. I get it. Doesn't make it right. I just got it.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned forgiveness. Talk to us about that, because I believe that's a huge component of healing, isn't it?
Yes, and so many people are resistant to the F word, Parole. And to me, there's two sides to it. Two sides to it. There's forgiving yourself, and there's forgiving others. And they're two separate entities. And I think for recovery after abuse, or recovery after childhood trauma, or those things that happen in our life, the first step is to forgive ourselves for what we didn't know at the time. I did not know that I had huge gaps and limiting beliefs from my childhood that caused me to keep getting into abusive relationships. Because let's face it, abusers are the ones who are very good at digging out our story and our gaps so they can use it for their benefit. They're very good at it. They do it in a way that is really loving and all of those things. I remember the man who tried to kill me ultimately, when he was saying, tell me a little bit about yourself. And then it went into another question, a little bit more, and a little bit more. And I remember he reached over and grabbed my hand and said, you will never feel lonely or abandoned again. Well, to the little girl in me, that was like, oh. So I was hooked.
Yeah.
And they're very good at that. So the first step for me was forgiving myself for not knowing what I didn't know at the time. That was the first step. Forgiving others. I know there's a lot of people who resist this and they say, oh, I'm not going to forgive him. Well, as long as you're not forgiving someone, as long as you're staying in that angry, non-acceptance state, you are not recovered, you are not healed. And you are still attached to that abuser.
Yep.
You're still attached to that person. I forgave my mother for what she did. I forgave my abuser for trying to kill me and for all the things he did to me. Literally, I could have a cup of tea with him right now. I choose not to, but I could if I ran into him on the street. I feel no connection anymore. But as long as you're in that, I will never forgive him. I will never forgive him. You're still attached to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think realizing that is very powerful. Forgiveness is not something that we do for others, it is something we do for ourselves.
Yep. And here's a little tip I'll give to anybody who's listening to this. I know there's resistance to forgiving others, but if you can say to yourself, that you are open to the idea of forgiveness. You're not going to forgive them because it doesn't happen overnight. You don't just sit there and say, I forgive you. But if you can get up in the morning and say, I'm working on forgiving, I'm open to forgiving, I'm thinking about forgiving, your brain starts to go in that direction. If you say to yourself, I have to forgive him, your brain will give you all sorts of resistance. It will give you the argument that you want to hear about why forgiveness is a bad idea. So change the dynamic just a little bit with your thoughts to say, well, I'm thinking about it. I'm open to it. It's a possibility down the road.
Yeah.
I haven't done it yet. And that stops your brain from starting the argument with you about why forgiveness is a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so powerful. Taking that baby step as the next step, that is really important because, like you said, it doesn't happen overnight. Doesn't
No, and
happen
I
like
get
that.
so tired. I don't know about you, Peru, but I get really tired of some of these people who say, this is the magic formula. Um, I call it spiritual bypassing because there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
And it's sad because yes, it's good to connect with something else, or if it's nature, if it's God, if it's whatever it is, that's fine. I get that. That's part of it. But you are not going to just say some affirmations in the morning for 21 days and boom, it'll be over. Not
It
gonna
doesn't
happen.
work that way. It doesn't work that way, and I think it takes consistent practice. It takes work because it is so easy to feel bad for what has happened to us. And whether we call it ego or playing the victim or generally just grieving for what has happened, that's a lot easier than doing the work to forgive somebody. That's
Yeah.
just the truth. So it takes effort, and it takes consistent effort. It's not a one-time thing.
No, and you will have failures. You will have moments where you don't make it, that you have a victimy day. I had days like that where I wanted to just be in my victim space. I wanted to own that. But as time went on, that was harder for me to do.
Yeah.
Or I couldn't sustain it for a very long time, Pearl. I'd be like, oh no, today I'm going to be a victim. And that was like, this is boring. I'm going to go. But that's over the course of time and a lot of digging and a lot of work. There
Yeah.
is no magic solution. You have to do the work and you have to be prepared to get ugly with yourself because it's going to be ugly. There are going to be things that come up. I have an older sister. She's recently passed away, but she was my lifeline. She was 15 years older than me. And when I was going through my healing journey, there was a lot that I had suppressed as memories as a child. And as I was healing, these things were coming up, and I think, oh my God, my mom and dad wouldn't have done that to me.
Yeah.
And I would phone her and say, did this happen? Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that happened. Wow. So she was good because I didn't get left in that sort of void of not being sure if I was imagining it or if it really happened.
Yeah.
So be
It's
prepared to
great
do
that
the
you had
ugly
that
crying and
support.
the ugly work.
Yes. And a lot of things that will come up will not make us feel good about ourselves. But I think
Nope.
it's all part of the process.
Trust the process. You have to do it. I mean, there was lots of times where I questioned, you know, maybe I was a faulty child. Maybe my parents were right to not love me and to abandon me. Maybe my parents were right. Look at all the abusive men in my life. Obviously, they were right. Abusive friends, abusive bosses, the whole 9 yards. Maybe
Yeah.
everybody was right. Maybe I was just ugly and rotten and spoiled and selfish and all of those things. But you have to work through that as well.
Yes. Yes. And the fact that you had somebody to support you through that process, I think that was beautiful.
I did. Non-traditional, traditional counseling and therapy was not a healthy experience for me, and I have found for some people it's not. And I have found out why. There is there is what would you call it? they don't want to go into where they think it might be victim blaming. So they won't ask tough questions, and they won't ask about your childhood story that you brought forward. They don't connect the two things together, Parul. So sure, you can go into your group therapy and you can talk about your abuse. And I remember going and we'd all tell our story about how he almost killed us. And then we'd have a donut and we'd all go home. And where are you mentally? You're attached to that abuser and you're doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
Not in one of those therapy sessions did somebody say to us, what's your goals for this week? Are you going to go and volunteer? What do you love to do? Did you start your painting? There was none of that. It was just a constant talk about the abuse. How did it make you feel? Well, it made me feel like crap. Like,
Yeah.
but nobody went deeper. No one went deeper. And that was the discovery that I made, was somebody actually said to me, somebody I hadn't seen for 20 years, and I was telling them my story of woe. And she looked at me and she took a sip of her coffee and she said, wow, that was a really boring story. And I was so angry. I was so angry. She went on to be my mentor and the person who helped me heal and the person who made me into an NLP practitioner and the person who wrote the foreword in my book, because without her being brutally honest at that point, I probably would still be stuck there.
So what did she mean when she said such a boring story?
It was all very victimy, and it was all about somebody else, and it was all about how hard everything had been on me. There was nothing positive in the story about, yes, this happened to me, but now I'm doing this and I'm working on this and I'm going there and I'm doing this. I remember going home on the streetcar, because I lived in Toronto and we had streetcars. I was so angry. I thought, oh, I am so happy I haven't seen her in 20 years, and I hope another 20 years goes by and I never want to see her again. But it had been planted. The seed had been planted. That I had been telling this story for 4 years. And the group counseling that I had been going to and the therapist were creating that continuation of that story. Because that's all they taught me, was to tell that story. So I learned from them that I could be nasty, I could be ugly, I could drink too much, I could do all of that. And if anybody questioned me, I could say, oh, I'm a victim of domestic violence. Don't do that. This person challenged me. And 3 days later, I phoned her up, and I remember she picked up the phone and she said, I knew I'd hear from you. And I said, can we do lunch or something? And she sat me down, and the very first thing she said to me was, what are you grateful for? And I said, grateful? I have no job. I live in a basement apartment. I started to go down that path, and she went, what are you
There she
grateful
goes
for?
again.
Yeah,
There she goes again.
here we go with the
What are
boring
you grateful
story.
for?
And eventually that's where I got into the gratitude and the gratefulness and starting to see things differently. Didn't happen overnight.
No,
Did not.
never does.
I hated being grateful. I hated waking up in the morning and saying, I'm grateful for. But eventually your tone, your brain, everything starts to develop new patterns, and that's the goal.
Yeah. And we start noticing things that despite everything, we are still here.
Yes. And we have an opportunity. And I remember one of the things she said to me, and I often say this to my clients, is, what are you curious about? And I thought, curious? Why would I be curious? To me, that sounded like a childlike thing. You know, I'm curious about giraffes today, you know. And she sent me home with homework, and she said, for the next week, I want you to walk around and be curious. I want you to walk in and out of places and be curious. And I thought, I don't even know how to do that. To do that, I had been so numbed from looking at the world as a big adventure and a big playful place to be, that I didn't know how to be curious. And when that started to come back, that was a changing moment as well. And I often say to people, let's go and try it and just be curious. If we don't like it, we can not do it again, but let's just be curious and go with an open mind. And it really
Mm,
does change the way you look at things.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think curiosity is a big thing. I remember I was having a conversation with somebody I trust, and it was a healing kind of session. And at one point, I said, "I am worried," and then I went on whatever I was worried about. I think it was in the context of business and getting clients. I think it's a couple of years ago, and he paused me and he said, "What if you could replace I worry with I wonder?" And just become curious about what will happen in the future instead of worrying about whether this next big thing you are doing, whether it'll work out or not, and that's clearly pulling you down. How about you just become curious? Oh my God.
It's a huge changer.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a great way for people who are going through a hard time and feeling like you're not going to come out of rock bottom. It's a great way to set goals. I wonder what would happen if I did this, if I applied for that job, if I asked my cousin to help me with my resume. I wonder. It sets it's a whole physical response. There's a whole bunch of words that are negative words: should, why, try.
Yeah.
But should is a big one. And should actually has a physical impact on you, Pearl. If you're sitting on the couch in the evening and you got dirty dishes in the sink and you say to yourself, oh, I should go and do those dishes, your body just sinks right into the couch. If you say, excuse me for a minute, I want to go and do the dishes, your body will start to move forward. It's a natural response. You want something, you go and you do it, whether it's the dishes or whatever it is. But should is one of those words where your whole body just collapses in like, ugh, ugh. And if somebody is telling you you should do something, your body reacts with anger. Your shoulders go up and you react with anger. You might not express it, but that's how your body reacts. It reacts with tension and thinking to yourself, how dare they tell me what I should or should not do? It's a very negative word. So the next time you find yourself saying should and you're not getting motivation, turn it around and say, I want to. And you'll find that you'll feel a little more motivated.
Yeah. I like this hack. I should. No, I want to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try this out.
Yeah, I do it with a lot of things now, and everybody laughs at me because I will say, well, I want to leave now our lovely tea party because I want to go home and do the laundry. And everybody will laugh because I really truly want to do that. But it does make you smile and it does make it a little bit more of an adventure rather than should, which seems like a big ordeal and too much of a burden.
That is true. That is true. Although I'm 100% sure that this wouldn't work when it comes to organizing my house or cleaning the house. This is definitely not going to work. But I'm going to apply this and delegate the roles to someone else who can do them.
Yeah, tell them they want to.
Tell them they want to. This
They
is
want
the
to.
favorite job you have in the whole world, so do it.
And it makes you feel wondrous.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Susan, you brought up a very, very important point about how you were participating in those groups and talking and rehashing your story over and over again and literally staying there. I want to bring it to the attention of our audience that that's not how you use your story to inspire yourself or other people. Because if we are only to look at the trauma that has happened, it creates connection. It's an important part of the story. But if we only focus on the what and we forget the so what, then the learning for the audience isn't there. And that's when it becomes a, what did your mentor say? A boring story or a victimy story and not an inspiring story. So thank you for bringing that up for us.
And you know, I'm gonna be brutally honest here for people who are listening. People get bored hearing that story, Parul. In what I found to be true, and when I look back, I can see it blazing in front of me, was over a period of time, I had less and less friends. I had less and less family that wanted me around. I was a drag. All I wanted to talk about was my victim story. All I wanted to be was a victim, and I wanted everybody to treat me with kid gloves and not upset me or make me angry. I mean, talk about being a prima donna. I had no personal reason. This is a big one. You are not responsible for someone abusing you, but you are personally responsible for your recovery. That's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. But how does somebody really get out of that state of feeling like a victim and take that first step? Because so many people would just stay there because they don't know any better or they aren't able to do anything better than being the victims.
The very first step that I say to women who have left their abuser and are feeling the victim of a domestic violence, I will say to them, you're no longer a victim of domestic violence because you walked out the door and you shut the door behind you. You stepped onto the sidewalk as a survivor, and the victim is left behind that door. That's where you are. You are now separated by a lawn and you're on the sidewalk. You have moved from being a victim to a survivor. Now, yes, that's a word. And yes, there's all kinds of pain that has to go along with that. But if you can move yourself back, even visualize yourself opening the door, walking out, shutting the door, turning your back on the house and walking to the sidewalk or the apartment, going down the elevator and leaving the foyer. If you can visualize that and move yourself out of the victimhood, as I call it, which was your old place, and into your survivorhood, which is now on the sidewalk waiting for you, that will help your brain look at life in a different way. So you will start to see things that you're grateful for.
Yep.
And I remember my mentor, when I was struggling with being grateful, she said to me, I said, I have nothing to be grateful for. Nothing. I have no money. Blah, 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 blah. And she sat there very patiently humming. And she said, well, I think that if I was you, I would be grateful that I no longer live with him. Well, that was a big one. So at the very top of your list, if you write, I am grateful, I am no longer being abused, I am grateful, I am no longer living with this person, I am grateful for those things, it starts to separate you from that person. And the big issue we have with the victimness that we feel is the loss, the grieving the loss. And we're not necessarily grieving the loss of the person, Parul, we're grieving the loss of the dream that was sold to us.
Yep.
Which brings us back to that childhood thread that is coming through, because
Yep.
they sell a dream, they sell something to fill that gap, to fill that void, that thing that you've always wanted. So they sell that to you, so you're grieving that. So there's a little exercise that I give to people when they are struggling with this transition from the victim to the survivor. And I get them to write their story, write the story in the third person, give themselves another name, and write it like you're writing a novel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can even write it from whatever perspective you want. But for me, I was always named Genevieve. Genevieve went through all of these things. I don't know where I got the name from, or I don't even like that name, but that was the name. And I would write about what happened to Genevieve. And it helps you to see the story clearly
Mm-hmm.
and see where the work needs to be done on yourself,
Yeah.
because you're separating it, you're distancing yourself from it, from the emotional part of it, and you're looking at it as Susan looking at Genevieve's story going, wow, Genevieve really needs to work on her self-love.
Mm.
Genevieve's got a problem there. So it helps you to see where those gaps are, because you're not personally attached to it. It's not your story anymore.
Yeah.
It is, but it's not. It's a trick. It
Mm.
works.
Mm. Yeah. I think putting things down on paper or in the form of a story, it would anyway help, even if you don't use the third person. I remember when I started writing my cancer memoir, and I was still in the thick of it. There was a period that I spent very angry at the life that had just been stripped away from me. And so I poured all my thoughts into that Word document. But when I read it back, I could see how much anger there was. And that was such a big clue for me that I had work to be done. I had work to do. That's one. And the second thing is, I wanted to write that book to inspire people. Nobody finds inspiration in anger because that's just anger.
No,
And and so it was a very big clue for me that I've got to get my house in order first, sort myself out, and then look at helping out other people. And that is how, from an angry book, it turned into an inspiring book because I had to go through that process myself and do the work.
yeah. And the same with me. My book wouldn't have been inspiring. My work wouldn't be inspiring if I was coming at you from a victim space.
Yeah.
It would just wouldn't inspire people to recover after abuse or recover after um, trauma that way.
Mm.
It's a great victim story, though.
It's a great victim story.
I think that'll be the title of my next book. Like the Great Gatsby, the great victim story.
Oh, I love that. We could create a movement about it. So many victim stories.
Yep. It's not an easy process, and we have to live in the reality of what happened to us, and we have to be realistic and honest about it.
Yeah.
There's a lack of honesty in our victim story, in the sense that we're not owning our part of the story. So when I sat down and I looked at my part of the story, and at first by starting to write about Genevieve, and then I could see the gaps and the loneliness and the abandonment. When I started to write about that and I got honest and I
Mm.
owned that and I worked on those emotions, that's when being a survivor moved into being a thriver, moved into helping other people. But we have to be honest about it. We can't hide behind it. So many times I have people, and I'll say this, the red flags that are there before you get married, before you move in, before you have the babies, before any of that. They are there, they're waving. But if we have gaps in our healthy love story, if it's twisted, if it's got problems, we will minimize, deny, or rationalize those red flags. And that's where owning your story begins, right
Yeah.
there. What was the red flag and what did you do? Did you deny it? Did you minimize it? Or did you rationalize it? You only have three
Mm.
choices. And you did it. So be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
hard to do. I had to do it for myself, sitting there going, oh my God, I did what? Like, how
I love that.
obvious
I
could
did
it have
what?
been? How obvious it could it have been? Like,
But the thing is, everybody does that. And you're so right. Those red flags have always been there. Whether it's a business relationship, whether it's a client that you shouldn't have taken on, whether it's a coach you shouldn't have signed up with, or a decision that you have taken and didn't turn out how you wanted it to. Those red flags were always there. We just chose something else
Mhm.
over whatever was staring us in the face.
Exactly. People who work through my worksheet about owning your story, the red flags, are the very first part of it. They find it fascinating, fascinating how they did that and what they did at the time. And it's
Yep.
interesting to work through that because we know they're there. We have a sense that all of this is wrong and it's not going to work out
Yeah.
to our to be good, but we tell ourselves the story. We
Yep.
make up stories, we make up lies in our head, very much as we did as children as a trauma response,
Mm.
right? The lies that become our limiting beliefs were things like, you know, if I'm better, if I get A plus instead of A, my daddy will come and visit me more often.
Mm.
Instead of looking at it and saying, well, my dad's a jerk. Because we're not old enough to deal with that, we make up stories, and those stories follow us as we go through. And it's really interesting when you do the red flags piece to look at your childhood, and that's where a lot of people start to recognize their childhood trauma,
Mm.
the event, the thing.
Mm. That is so true. You have used the word survivor and thriver a couple of times. So I was recently asked this question, what I thought of the word survivor. So I'm throwing that question at you. What do you think of the word survivor? Do you like it, hate it, okay with it? What is your experience?
I don't like any of the words. To be quite honest, I think survivor gets overused. I think that thriver is well, I don't know. Okay, here's the thing with thriver for me is everybody's definition of what it means to thrive is different per role. If
Yep.
you and I were sitting in a room and somebody said to us, write down your definition of thriving, we would be way off each other.
Mm.
It's the same with success. Success is done on your terms, not on somebody else's terms. It's the same with the
Yep.
word love. Love means something different to you than it means to me. Trust. These are big definition, defining personal words.
Yep.
So thriver to me is a bit disingenuous because we all thrive differently. Survivor is better than victim.
Mm.
So I use survivor, but I prefer to say that women who have come through this and are on the other side are now their courageous personal advocate because that's what they need to be. You
Yep.
can't rely on other people to advocate for you. You can't rely on the courts to do what you want them to do, what you think they should do, which keeps a lot of people trapped in anger. You can't rely on that. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to be that person. And that takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of vulnerability to step out and say, this is what I need to happen. This is
Mm.
what I am going to do to make that happen, to help that happen, to set that on the path of happening. That takes a lot of courageous vulnerability. So survivor is better than victim. Victim is a word I really dislike a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And victim keeps you stuck in a very negative space.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I would say one thing that is great about Survivor, and I think you said the same thing in different words, is it's an immediate reminder that I am not where I used to be.
Exactly.
So there was somebody who was objecting to the word cancer survivor in this conversation, and to them it was a reminder of cancer, and to me it was a reminder that I was no longer sitting in that oncology ward with chemo plugged in into me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was happy about it. I'm not the one who's going to the chemo ward now anymore. I'm happy being a survivor. So so yeah, it's the meaning that we attach to different things, different words, different labels that make all the difference.
Yeah. I think it's so true. There are some people I get into real serious debates with people who have been in domestic violence and they want to hang on to that word victim because to them it represents that they went through something awful, and it does. But if you see yourself as a victim, that will be a lifelong label that you will give yourself, and it will show up everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's not a healthy label. I get it. You did go through something awful. So I can say, yes, I was a victim of domestic violence. But when I left that space, I became a survivor of domestic violence, quite literally, quite literally. And now I am an advocate for other women who are in the space of moving from into what I call real recovery, because there is a difference between healing, which is very, there's so many
Out there,
people. Yeah.
out there.
But what you really want to do is you want to recover from this. You want to recover, just like you recovered from cancer.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And an undesirable event that happened.
Hmm. And now you're in recovery.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, they use that word specifically, in recovery. I'm in recovery.
Yeah.
But we don't associate that with domestic violence. But when you think about it, as soon as you shut the door and you move on, you're in recovery. I wish we had little chips to give to women. 30 days in recovery, 60 days in
Oh,
recovery.
that would be awesome.
Yeah.
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 We do get, I wouldn't say we get chips, but we have that terminology in the world of cancer. We would say 1 year, no evidence of disease, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, great milestones to look forward to.
Yeah. And it's not there for people who have trauma.
Mm.
Not that cancer isn't traumatic. That's not what I meant. But I meant trauma like from domestic violence or
Of course.
sexual assault or any of those things.
Yeah.
We are not given those milestones to look
No.
forward to.
No.
And I think that's a definite gap in the whole system.
It definitely is. It definitely is. A life-threatening illness, yes, it changes life for those who survive it, but so do things like domestic abuse or violence or sexual abuse or incest or any other kind of trauma, really.
Hmm.
And who gets to decide that one trauma is more legit, it's more valid than the other kind of traumas? No, nobody gets to decide that. Every trauma is equally legit, every fear is equally valid.
Yeah. And I think that we don't celebrate. One of the things that I learned along the way, and I pass on to people who are listening or work with me, is that we need to celebrate our successes like they do in, I'll use Alcoholics Anonymous. They celebrate successes. So 30 days sober, 7 days sober, all of those things they celebrate. They have cupcakes and coffee and they get together and they celebrate that. But we don't do that in the domestic violence recovery space. So my conversations with my clients on every week, the very first question I ask is, what success are we celebrating today? And I'm not talking about the big things. That can be small. It can be that for 7 days in a row, she got up and had a shower and went out for a walk.
Yeah.
That's worthy of a celebration. It can be that, she got her resume done and she's looking for a job or whatever it is. We need to celebrate more of that for these women instead of leaving them, because a lot of times they feel they're not making any progress. They haven't done the big things. They don't have a new house. They don't have a job. They don't have all of these things. So um, they feel useless and they feel that it's never going to happen for them. But if you can step them back and say, well, what was your success this week? What was the small step that you took this week? Let's celebrate that. Then it helps them see that they are making progress.
Why do you reckon there are no chips that are being given to people who have been through domestic abuse? And while I ask this question, Susan, I am actually wondering if domestic abuse is something that we have normalized, that it is not seen a big thing in the society anymore, it's something that happens behind closed doors. Is that what it is?
That is what it is. Sadly, this is something that I've been working on because I feel that it is wrong. Every statistic that you read about domestic violence is negative. Every single one. You go on any page about domestic violence, it will say 4 out of 10 women will be slapped by their intimate partner. Instead of saying 6 out of 10 women leave successfully and have great lives afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's all focused on the negative, and we have normalized that, and it bothers me. I am on a mission. My next mission in 2021 is to change that around and start focusing on how many women now have their own apartment. How, because you get the statistic. 40% of women who leave their abusive spouse will end up homeless. That's not true. They might, for a moment, they might end up in a shelter, but ultimately, Parul, they do move up to their apartment. Where's that
Yep.
statistic?
Mm.
Some become millionaires. I know a few. I know one woman in Australia, and I've interviewed her a couple of times. She is amazing. She actually did live on the streets of Melbourne, Australia, with her 2 young girls, and she is now a millionaire with big fancy offices in Melbourne and all of that kind of stuff. Does that statistic get out there? No.
No. No.
Nope. She's just one of the homeless ones.
Mm.
So I have spoken to many people about this because it's discouraging. When you go on a domestic violence site, let's say you're in a bad relationship and you go on the site, the very first thing you see is the negative statistics, Pearl.
Mm.
A whole host of them. And yes, I get it, because for a part of my life, I was a fundraiser for charity, and these statistics are about money. Sorry, I hate to say it. It's the same with cancer statistics. Okay?
Yep. Yep.
It's all geared towards getting money. But we need to get money from the positive. Look at how many women have stepped up. Look at how many women are now, business women, or even if they're not business women, even if they work 2 jobs at the grocery store and Walmart, and they're providing for their kids. Sorry, that's successful after domestic violence. That's it. That should be what we're counting.
Yep. Yep.
I'm real passionate about it, sorry.
No, no, no. That's what we want to hear. I'm sure it's a conversation for another time, but
Yes.
when we talk about domestic violence, we only we automatically think of women in that situation. Have you had experiences where men have found themselves in this situation where their partners were abusive?
Yes. I've known men personally who have been physically assaulted by women. And I know a lot of men who have been taken in by women financially, financial abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, so on and so forth. I mean, let's face it, I hate to be nasty, but we know a lot of bitchy gold digging women. They're out there. And if you have a man who has the same sort of gaps from childhood, he will be easily caught up in that, especially if she is beautiful and sexy and all of that. She can work that to her advantage. So yes, it exists, and we're in denial about that in a big way in this society. And men are now coming out and talking about it, because when you think about it, when we talk about there's different nuances to our language, right? If you say, oh, look at her, she's a gold digger, we almost say it with a smile on our face, like, oh, she's just a gold digger, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal to the guy that she's going to take advantage of.
Yep.
Right? If we see a guy and we say, oh my God, he's going to take advantage of her, we get that gut feeling and we need to step in and do something and let her know and blah, blah, blah. But the gold digger, she's just a gold digger. She's, she just wants a better life for herself. Different way that we look at these things, and it has a negative impact on men. And I know men who have been assaulted by women, I know one who had his nose broken. This is a true story. He was a friend of mine. She broke it with the telephone, you know, the old phones on the thing. She smashed it into his face, broke his nose. He was covered in blood. He calls the police. The police arrive and they said, go to the hospital. There's nothing we can do about it. Nobody will believe you, buddy.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like that was it. He was a
That's
friend of mine.
just
He phoned me up. I said, I don't
sad.
know what to say. No, they
That's
wouldn't
just so
charge her.
sad.
Hmm?
It's just so sad.
But the part that was scary about that, and he and I talked about it, is that he
Mm.
couldn't even defend himself. Because if he went to defend himself, grab her arms or push her away or do any of that, she could have called the police in a heartbeat and he'd be charged.
Mm.
So we have a real, I don't want to say it's a disparity because the majority of abuse victims, abused people are women. So I'm not saying that that's not true at all. But there is an issue for men who get physically assaulted by women. They are incapable of defending themselves because the law would look at them as the abusive person.
Hmm.
And where do they go?
Yeah. Yeah, there is definitely need to do something about that and support those people of our society.
Exactly. But it's a tough one. It's a tough one. It's a really
It's a tough
difficult.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this situation, we already have a bias towards one gender.
Yes.
Mm.
We, but you know where it comes from, Parul? Everybody's going to love this, but it comes from the patriarchy that women are the weaker gender and the weaker sex, so they need to be protected. Men are the stronger sex. There's no way that a woman could beat on a man because he's, you know, So it comes from our whole societal belief system.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for police officers to go in who are all big and burly for the most part and say to a guy, oh, the woman hit you? Like, you know that deep down inside they're thinking, really? So it's all part of that misogyny, patriarchal society kind of thinking that we have been brought up with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a one-on-one comparison, but until rape became such a big thing and started being interpreted for what it really is, there was a time, or there still are people who would tell the girls that, oh, you must have done something to provoke the man. You
Yep,
didn't dress up appropriately. Da 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 da.
absolutely.
Because because the beliefs are already biased and they have already decided who the culprit is, who the perpetrator is, and there's little that you can do.
Nope. And that fight is still going on.
That fight is still going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us,
There's so much. Sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I said there's so many layers to this issue, Parul, that we could probably talk every week for the next 10 years and not solve any of them.
Yeah.
But at least we get it out in the open, right?
Yes, at least we are starting conversations.
Yes.
And that's a great beginning. That's a great beginning. We are sharing our story, we are sharing our perspective,
Yep.
and we are starting conversations. I think that's really, really important. So
Yes, I
tell us,
agree.
Susan, are you working on something exciting at the moment?
Yes, I am. I have a recovery after abuse 12-week program starting on November 1st. It's going to be really exciting. Yes, because I work from a different perspective. We have two traumas going on at the same time, and that's why this healing mess recovery is messy. We have our emotional trauma from our broken heart from our spouse, and we have our psychological trauma that we're carrying forward from our childhood, and they are not talking to each other. So I dive really deep into that and get you some real recovery and get you moving forward into that survivor, personal advocate, woman. Oh, here's a word I don't like, empowered. But we'll call it empowered. Yeah.
Does that tick you more than survivor?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You're the second coach to say that. I've
Oh,
heard it before.
well, I think it's overused.
It's overused, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, do I feel empowered? No. I don't know. I don't even know what it means to tell the truth.
You know what I'm thinking when somebody, well, I use the word empower and I've been thinking of reducing it from my vocabulary. But when somebody is feeling shit, they are feeling shit.
Yeah.
It's it's actually a little hard to go in and empower them in that moment. They will come around, but when they are in there, it's hard.
Yeah, it's like, okay, what are you empowering me to do? I'm going to have magic powers. I don't know what that means. So, but anyway, it starts November 1st. And if you go to recoveryafterabuse.ca for Canada.ca and click on 12-week program, it'll tell you all about it. It's going to be a good one.
Why don't you leave all the relevant links, including the link to this program, just underneath this video when we finish?
I will. I will do that. Thank you.
You're welcome. You said it starts on 1st of November, and that makes me think. And you said it's 12 weeks, right?
Yes.
So it's going to go into the new year, which is fantastic because people can start working towards that big goal in November and then have Christmas and really start the next year strong. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that was one of my motivations for starting it then. You know, I hesitated and we'll take a week off over the holiday period and whatnot, but I hesitated and then I thought, no, what a better way to start the new year with all the tools and resources to really jumpstart your goals and your new life.
Yeah, yeah.
I was going to say empowered life, but I took it back.
No, you can use the word nobody's counting.
I want to thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a real fun time.
Yes, for me too. Before we let you go, is there one big message that you have that you would like to share with our audience?
Yes, there is one big message I'd like to share. The fact that you ended up in an abusive relationship was not your fault in any way, shape, or form. But there is life, a much better life, almost a fearless life, a fulfilled life, a beautiful life on the other side. Take that first courageous step and walk out the door. It might take you some planning, it might take some steps in between, but start taking those baby small steps, celebrate each of your successes, and walk out the door. And when you get on the sidewalk on the other side, say to yourself, I did it, I did it, I did it, and keep going.
Brilliant. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it.
Precisely.
Susan, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. I loved our conversation. And
Yes,
thank
I
you
love
so much for sharing all these nuggets of knowledge with us.
it. You're welcome, Parole. You have a really great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye, everyone.